over the last 3 days, thanks to the excellent curation of the speakers, we have learned about Germany from Flocky, UK from Reka, we have heard about British Columbia from John, Malaysia about Angelina. We've kind of had this a global perspective. Project are talking about Tokyo. We've kind of had this global perspective on how do you build innovation ecosystems. Now let's come back home, as in come back to India and look at from India's own biomedical innovation ecosystem story. And as we say, history repeats itself. We are sort of looking at the history to see what it holds for learnings for the present and the future. That's what this session is about. Let me start with a question, and I would like to start from the students who are at the back half. If you look at this photo, can you give out any guesses? Just shout out, what do you think this is? And because it's a biomedical presentation, I think it's fairly obvious it's something biomedical, but what do you think this is? Any guesses? Close? Well. So this is India's first indigenously developed heart valve. And this did not happen yesterday or the last 10 years or not even the last 20 years. This happened between the late 1970s to the early 1990s. So we're kind of taking ourselves back almost 50 years to look at the story of India's biomedical innovation creation and look at what learnings from 50 years back hold for even today. This was developed in Trivandrum, my hometown, by an institute called the Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute for Medical Sciences and Technology. It started off as a government hospital. They then had a biomedical technology wing, which created a number of these biomedical technologies. And they did not just keep it as patents or as papers, but they commercialized and brought it into actual practice and in the bodies of a number of people who continue to live today. So that's the story. And it's been a very close to heart story because growing up in the city of Trivandrum, because my father is from the medical fraternity, so he was not involved with this, but it's been part of the folklore of the city of Trivandrum as one of its hallmark stories in some sense. So having lived through that as a kid, sort of 6 years back, when I was sort of beginning to do more of my deeper research, I thought it's important that I go back and see what happened in my backyard and what learnings does it have from there. So this is sort of that story that came through from that. A quick bit of background. When we talk about innovation ecosystems, we're talking about an alignment structure which has a number of different actors who are trying to align themselves to realize a value proposition. So just a definitional background to it. And typically an ecosystem structure has 4 elements to it. It's about the activities that happen within the ecosystem, who do these activities as in the actors, what are their positions as in what do they do within that broader system, and then finally what sort of resource transfers happen between them. So typically an ecosystem consists of these 4 elements. Now let's come back to the Indian context of the 70s and the 80s. Taking ourselves back about 50 years, we need to think about a country where biomedical as a term itself was grand and new. Right? So there is no real capacity in terms of human capital, or there's not a training module really on biomedical. So the whole concept of the technology itself was emerging, which is true for a lot of the new emerging technologies that we have today as well. So we might be talking robotics, or we might be talking quantum today. 50 years back, it was biomedical. So we are talking about a very emerging technology where there is no clear blueprint that we have on what the technology is, what it might provide, all of that. So that's from a technology standpoint and the challenges around that. Second, when we travel 50 years back, we are talking about an India where there was import substitution, customs duty being high. It is difficult to bring in technology from the outside. Private sector has been liberalized, so the private sector is not as active as it is now. We are in that sort of institutional structure where those challenges also exist. So the real question that we were really asking in this research was, how do you really build innovation ecosystems in such context where there is both the emerging technology related uncertainty and within a context where all these institutional structures are also being weak. So it's a context where there's absolute uncertainty in sort of innovation terminology, where outcomes are unknown and actions needed to be taken are also unknown. So it's like both are unknown unknowns. So it's a case of absolute uncertainty. Now let's delve deeper into the story and then understand what the story really tells us. 1978, the background to this was, at that point of time, there were a lot of people, especially young people, who had rheumatic heart disease. And this was particularly affecting younger people. And so if they had a heart valve, that would extend life. That was the real challenge behind the motivation for why they were doing it. Importing a heart valve was super expensive for people to be affording it, and so importing was ruled out. So you had to have some bit of indigenously developed low-cost variant of a heart valve, which can ensure that the younger people who were being affected by this can live longer life. That's really the mission orientation for where this whole thing started. So right when they started, they set very clear ecosystem targets. One was about affordability because it had to be used. Second was it had to be used, as in it has to be commercialized. So very clearly right at the start saying affordability will guide decision choices that we make, and we will ensure that it goes into the patient and it's not stays in the pattern. So that sort of setting of the boundaries was the first thing that they did. Second, because it was emerging technology and you didn't have the required machining or the technology around it, they did two things. One, created subgroups within the institute on specific sub-technologies. For example, on polymer research, precision engineering. For that, they created their own internal teams. And they said, we don't have to do everything. What we don't have outside, we do these internal teams, but we also cleverly engage with other actors. So just as Roland was saying earlier about this radar expert and these expertise from the outside, where you need, you kind of go build on from that. And what they did there, again, 1970s, government labs were what was dominant within the Indian system. So they went and worked with ISRO and VSSC on materials, came here to Bangalore to work with HAL on some of the components and inputs on things, went to National Chemical Laboratory in Pune to do some of the chemical testing. So working cleverly across boundaries. So they are doing a biomedical, but working with an aerospace, working with a science laboratory to do the other pieces was about integrating across disciplines. So doing some things within boundaries, doing some things across boundaries, and right from the start, having clear outlines on affordability and commercialization. This was what was really happening in the 78 to 90 period. 1980 to 1990, you might think like that's a 10-year long period, what they were doing for 10 years. They had to go through 4 different variants of the heart valve before arriving at the one that eventually got commercialized. It was a trial and error learning. I mean, for scientists, it's not new, but the fact that in the first case, it was a material fault. So, okay, we have not reached the testing stage, right at the material stage, they had to change. Second was, okay, material fine, but when they were doing animal testing, that's when they realized the problem, and then they had to go back to scratch, get new materials, get new scientific input, all of that. So going back and forth multiple times over a 4-year period, when testing also they had to put up from scratch. There was no animal testing center. So you create an animal testing center. So this is not what a biomedical lab needs to do by itself, but because the ecosystem was not there, you had to do 5 other things also for you to do whatever you have to do. So they had to put this product testing centers, animal testing centers, and the other part was because affordability was a key driver right at the start, when they had to look at CNC machines and testing machines, they found that if they have to import, the cost is super high. And the moment you import at that cost, you cannot sell it at an affordable cost at the end of the day. So then creating low-cost equipment for CNC and testing machines in-house to ensure that you can then create the product at a lower enough cost so that it's more affordable at the end of it. Along with that, creating these learning spaces, because medical device creation and testing was not a norm. So for example, one anecdote that we heard from the interview was, if you drop a pen, what you will do, you will take it up, clean it up, and then again write it. But in a medical device, if something falls down, you have to just literally put it out and then take a new machine, new material, and then start from scratch, because contamination control is important. Now, this is not default psyche of engineers also, because like engineers in a non-medical setting lab don't have to do this. But in a medical setting lab, clean rooms are clean rooms, contamination control is contamination control. And so you have to inbuilt that psyche and process into how the scientists think about building the whole thing. So all this tacit learning space related aspects also had to be brought up. And finally, when they had the device, somebody has to approve. The country does not have an approval body. Now, who will approve? Okay, so we create an approval body also ourselves. Went and create an independent approval body for ethics, mixture of retired chief justice, few scientists, few surgeons, put together a committee. Even that the Biomedical Institute is doing. So a science institute does not have to do these 10 things, but you have to do it sometimes when you are in that sort of a setting with an emerging technology where you are probably the people who know it best in the whole mix in the country. So building all of that into the ecosystem was extremely important in what happened during this period. Moving to the next stage, which is the 90s to 95. Once they had the animal testing approved, then being a medical device, this is a class 3 medical device. So medical devices are the class 1, class 2, class 3. Class 1 is more like a blood bag, which is like outside the body. Class 2 is like an oxygenator, which supports you with oxygen. So it is outside and partly supporting you for the life. This is a class 3 medical device, which goes inside the body. So highest risk and doesn't work, patient dead. So you have to be extra careful. So they have to then look at multiple clinical trials. Now, when you come to clinical trials, because the technology is new, when you go to hospitals, people don't allow you to do it because it is a reputational risk for the hospital to put in a device and say, if patient dead, hospital closed. You will have strike next day in front of the hospital. Now, what will you do? What then happened is Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute put their own reputation at stake and said, we will brand it in our own name. So it's even today called Chitra Valve. So they put their own brand up front and say, we will take the reputational risk also ourselves. Imagine this is again a government lab. Then from a monitoring standpoint, again, country doesn't have a monitoring committee. So you then bring a senior cardiac surgeon to head a committee, create all of that ecosystem. So building number of these legitimization steps with trials, putting their own reputation at stake, building personal networks, all of that had to be done in that sort of translation phase just to get hospitals to do clinical trials. We haven't got to paying customers. We are just at clinical trial stage now. Then, once the clinical trials were beginning to happen, clinical trials were being done in multiple hospitals. So you had to go from doing a prototype 10 valves to creating 100 valves. Now that's a scale up. Now how do you do that? You go around to industry, ask, can somebody partner? Well, there is no biomedical industry who will create this. So then they started a techno-proof facility within the institute, very much similar to, let's say, the art park next door, or like a technology transfer organization. So something of a similar nature, where within the institute, they were creating a lab type setup where you could create it at some scale, like from 10 to 100, not industry scale yet, but a slightly larger scale beyond the lab, just to prove to the industry that this is can be created at larger scales. Point one. Even after that, industry doesn't want to take up because it is reputational risk again. And so what happens? One of the senior scientists, he, through his personal network, knew TTK Group. For those of you who know TTK Group, they are known for pressure cookers. They are the prestige group. Now, what does a pressure cooker have to do with biomedical? Well, only one thing in common, clean rooms. And because they were also into valves, but pressure cooker valves, this is hot valve, but pressure cooker valves there. That's about the only two similarities that you have between these two. But we are in a, when, like, as you say, when you don't have choice, you kind of go with choices that you have in front of you, right? That's the only thing that was there. And so they worked with them, created a team of technical people within that to do a bit of commercial scale generation. TTK group initially did in their own pressure cooker factory in Chennai, and then started creating a industry setup in Kerala itself, in Trivandrum, to start doing a bit more of a commercial scale. So that is sort of the bridging between the technical and the commercial domains. Story not ending there. Now you are at sort of 1,000 valves, clinical trials done. Now you want to put it to more commercial scale. What will you do? So TTK wants to now create a commercial scale, but TTK was like, boss, I don't know all this tacit knowledge. You scientists know what you do. I don't know all of this. If I have to do it, you have to come to me. As in, you have to come to me being the lead of the biomedical technology center, was asked to come and join a private institute. So imagine this is a senior scientist G grade person in a government lab, secure job, being nudged to come and work with a startup almost, because there's a hardly commercial scale, and wanting to be the director here if the technology has to be commercialized. And people did that. Biomedical technology wing head moved from Tirunal Institute to head this technology within this private TTK Chitra valve group, and that personal mobility had to be done for commercialization to happen. Then along with it, very strong tech transfer documentation. And because they did all of this, which is you had the independent ethics committee, you had the monitoring committee, all these governance rules were built from scratch. All of these rules subsequently became what national standards for DST. So what a lot of the DST labs today follow very much draw on the principles and policies which were drawn in terms of committees and policies that these group of people did in these 80s and the 90s, which is the long-term national diffusion of policies which kind of happened. So you can see this was not out of the blue. There was a lot of bridging across technical and commercial boundaries that really happened. Long story short, we know innovation has these three phases: ideation, experimentation, translation. Okay, fine. But within that, when we are really trying to build it for deep tech in an emerging type of setting, in a context which had very little institutional support mechanisms and structures, you need to go through this iterative, circular, complex process of how do you establish ecosystem configuration, model it, and expand it to really translate from lab to market. And what we really saw across the stages is, from, again, technical term being boundary work, but the concept is, at the initial stage, it was fairly loose boundaries where you had actors coming in and going out. You kind of saw that they kind of go work with the DSSC, they go work with the HAL. So very loose boundaries in terms of actors coming in and going out of the system in that ideation stage. In the second stage, bit more organized in terms of experimental spaces as to actors who are working with it. And once they reach the translation stage, more defined sort of boundaries. So the boundary over the period of time in terms of actors and activities really changed from what was more amorphous to being more defined. What do we really learn from a 50-year-old story for the 2026 world? First, co-creation. So we heard that in the previous thing also, the concept about being iterative, non-linear, decentralized, all of that. So because we kind of heard a longer period on that, I'm not going to delve deep on it. But the second point was super interesting from what we heard. Very often when we have these discussions of deep tech commercialization, a holding point usually comes around patents. Okay. Where does my patent close and where does the partner's patent start? Now, in this case, what they really did well is right at the start, they put the national mission almost upfront and say, this is a nation building initiative. We want Heartwell to save our youth. We want biomedical commercialization to happen, and that's the end goal. And all of us are doing our own piece in that. And that nation building motive or a grand challenge mission oriented motive really helped ensure that collective action behind it really coerced around that larger mission and not be sort of siloed into where is my patent and where is my paper. And across the three phases, in the ideation phase, really good scope in terms of changing ideas, changing course of correction, all of that. And in the experimental phase, yes, technology experimentation, but along with that experimentation in terms of social practices and how there was a strong set of bottom-up practices in terms of governing, in terms of learning, all of this really coming into place, supporting the technology experimentation part. And finally, at the translation phase, as we saw, techno proving, going and finding a totally unrelated pressure cooker industry to commercialize, to a scientist moving from lab to a startup, all of these, which might come in an obvious context as being extreme, had to be done to really go from technical to commercial boundaries. So those were really the practical implications that we learned from this. And just picking up on something which we discussed yesterday evening at the panel discussion, very often management research tends to stop at this ABS4 paper, right? Like a paper is the gold standard, we've got the paper, now we will go home. But it's important that we kind of engage with the translation of that. So yesterday, Ramanan sir was asking about whether there's a patent in a paper, but not a patent in the paper, but how do you commercialize social science research? And one, though not commercialize, but just to kind of take it to practice. What we have done, especially with this paper, is we have written up blogs for the World Economic Forum. And last year, after the Mahakumbh, if you remember the news story, the main headline story was Minister Piyush Goyal ji coming in and saying India needs deep tech startups, right? So soon after that, literally next week to that, I wrote up this piece for the Business Line saying, drawing on from the Chitra story, what does that mean for policy implications within India in terms of fostering deep tech startups, right? So that real sort of translating of research to practice in terms of policy decisions is something that we need to consciously engage in, especially the early stage career researchers. We need to think about that more consciously. And coming to some of the heroes of the story, Professor Vallitan, Padma Vibhushan, is the person who started the institute, SCTI. It was, I would consider an absolute honor to have had a discussion with him while he was still alive in 2020s as part of this research to understand how and what they did. He's also Padma Vibhushan awardee, and a couple of years back he passed away. So it's an absolute privilege to have had an interaction with him before that. And Karnataka's own hero, T. Jagannathan, he is the head of the TTK Prestige Group, which commercialized technology. And this year, Padma Shri Awards, we have Prahlada ji also here. We have another Padma Shri in the room. So T. Jagannathan ji is one of the Padma Shri awardees this year for his contributions both to Heart Valve as well as to the TTK Prestige Group in general. He was awarded posthumously late last year. He again passed away, and another hero, local hero of the story. And we're super happy to kind of see that the DST picked up on our research. And last year when DST put out something around inclusive healthcare, they in fact referred to our work and highlighted that in their work as well. So we're happy to have kind of reached the policy circles from what the research was. The research itself was published in the Journal of Product Innovation Management, one of the top 2 innovation journals. And this was published in 2024. And last year, it was one of the top cited papers. So we got this award earlier this year for this work. So we're happy to have made both a research contribution, a policy-oriented input from that over this work. I will close out on the note that a lot of these case studies from India, we don't really document and take it to our classrooms. With that in mind, we are bringing out a book coming out in a couple of months' time, where we have pulled together case studies of tech innovation like this, social, rural entrepreneurship stories from rooted context within India as a collection of books which of the academics in the room would probably be interested in taking it to your classrooms. So, and on that note, I will close. Namaste and thank you.